Good morning. You are listening to Baptist for Liberty. I'm your host, Joanna Works, and today is Friday, July 25th. Alright, so we made it to our last program of this week, and I hope you enjoy it and have a good weekend after this. But for right now, I'm just going to borrow some of your time. Alright, so we're going to talk about diets, and there's one particular that I'm going to get to. I don't know if we're going to get to some more after this one. In particular, I want to look at the Paleo Diet. I know this has been kind of popular, and I've known some people who've had some pretty good success with it, and there's been quite a few books, I think, written on it, and I grabbed a couple of them to look through, because, hey, when you know somebody who has good results, I'm like, okay, I'll look at this. And one particular person is a preacher, so this isn't supposed to be a jab at them or anything. But when I was reading this book, I noticed, like a lot of secular books, it was very evolution heavy. As if, the whole theory of the paleo diet was based on evolution. So I couldn't get through the book very far, much less implement the diet. And there were other diets and things that I thought that made actually more sense. But anyway, so earlier this month I saw an article pop up on Answers in Genesis. Does a paleo diet hold the evolutionary key for good nutrition? Answers in Genesis, anytime when something is very saturated in evolution, they're not afraid to take it on. That's what they're there for, really, is to take a lot of things that is common that we just take for granted in our society, and then look at it through the lenses of scriptures as well as science to see, is it genuine? Is it real? Does it work? And if it does, why does it work? From a scriptural standpoint rather than from an evolutionary standpoint. Because sometimes things have a grain of truth or a lot of truth, but it's wrapped up in a package. People explain it away with their worldview of why it works. So anyway, this particular article is written by Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell, and it was posted on July 3rd. So we're just going to jump right in here. Pre-agricultural Paleolithic saga. Evolutionists believe our bodies evolved to fit a pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer's diet. Some believe a return to a caveman's paleo diet would make us into the healthier people evolution equipped us to be. They advocate evolutionary medicine, believing many modern nutritional disorders relate to the mismatch between the diet to which we have evolved and relatively newer agricultural-based Neolithical diets. Now, before I continue to read this, I would just like to add my own thoughts and comments from just everything I've read on health and nutrition and my own personal experience. There is a lot of things in our modern food that does deprive our body of beneficial minerals and vitamins, as well as loading us up on poison and junk that we can't process. The difference is, though, it's not because of evolution that our bodies have changed or evolved or things like that. And even if you want to say like a culture has evolved, if you want to use that word there. But we do put a lot more of synthetic and unnatural chemicals. Even a lot of our vitamins are synthetic. It's not natural. So that's going to produce a lot of malnutrition and disorders. And I don't think it has anything to do with evolution. We have a very broken food system. And anyway, I'm going to finish reading this. Others suspect we have evolved beyond our Paleolithical past in more than just brain power, distancing us biologically from our ancestors and rendering their diet irrelevant to modern health. Plotting our presumably long Paleolithic climb down from the trees and up the evolutionary ladder from 2.5 million until about 10,000 years ago, evolutionists presume evolving post-Paleolithic humans invented agriculture and began eating grains and dairy products. pre-agricultural humans would, evolutionists believe, have not used dairy products and therefore would not have evolved digestive systems able to digest lactose, nor would they have consumed grain. So what would a Paleolithic caveman's diet consist of? Versions vary, but generally such diets are grain-free, sugar-free, pasta-free, fried-free, dairy-free, and in some cases bean-free. On a paleo diet, if you could kill it, catch it, pick it, or dig it up, then you can eat it. Paleo cuisine. How do evolutionists know or think they know what human ancestors ate? The evolutionary view of human history suggests a close relationship between diet and human evolution. Primitive hominins presumably evolved to use tools, cook nutritious brain foods, evolve big brains, and eventually plant crops and domesticate animals. The evidence, in quotation marks, for those developments is all presumption dependent. Anthropologists assume that humans evolved from ape-like ancestors, that the human brain evolved when ancestral hands were bipedally freed for higher pursuits, and that the whole process took a couple of million years. Sorry, I stutter sometimes. There's certain words and just phrases it's hard for me to actually say out loud. This concept of evolution. Okay, we regularly discuss the innumerable scientific difficulties with every aspect of these claims, as well as the fact that this version of human history rejects our Creator's eyewitness account of who and what we really are. Hunting or farming. Even the evolutionary presumption that human ancestors had to subsist as hunter-gatherers before evolving enough brain to farm and raise animals is completely at odds with the biblical account of human history. Not only did man begin his life beyond Eden as a tiller of the ground, Genesis 3:17-18, but after the global flood, farming began right away. Noah planted a vineyard, Genesis 9:20. Hunting would have had to wait a while, as the animals aboard the ark, preserved to replenish the earth, needed time to establish themselves and reproduce. The first hunter mentioned in the Bible was Nimrod, Genesis 10:9, Noah's great-grandson. Following the dispersion from the Tower of Babel, hunting and gathering likely became a prominent part of many cultures as people migrated, lost agricultural expertise, and had to regain it. Often it is easier to survive as hunters and gatherers in an undeveloped land before establishing an agricultural base. There is certainly no biblical reason to suppose that either the farmer or the hunter-gatherer would be the intellectual superior of the other, much less the idea that a hunter-gatherer's diet would be more natural for us. And I'd also like to add in here, they kind of hinted at it because the only hunter mentioned or the first hunter mentioned was in Genesis 10:9. But in the beginning, man didn't kill and eat animals. The first time God says that you could kill animals was after Noah got off the ark. And the Lord said, eat every herb and the animals and etc. So, Adam and Eve didn't eat meat. They didn't need to. They had the garden. So their very first, even when everything was perfect and they were in the Garden of Eden, there was no death, so there was no killing of animals. They didn't need to. They just ate off the ground, and again, they didn't have to till the ground because everything was perfect, so they didn't need to work for their food. It was just there for them to pick and eat. And I like this point, though, about whether you're a hunter, gatherer, or a farmer, one doesn't necessarily mean that it's superior over the other. I think our big problem in diets is just we cram so much in our prepackaged foods. But that doesn't mean hunting and gathering is superior to farming. Screw down here just a little bit. Paleo fantasy. Evolutionist Marlene Zuck, author of the book Paleo Fantasy does not believe paleo history should influence our nutritional choices. She contends that the many genetic changes in the course of human evolution have rendered such considerations irrelevant. Believing in molecules to man evolution, Zuck says some of those genes we had back in the Pleistocene were the same as the genes we had when life was aquatic, and no one's suggesting we start filter feeding. No one suggests we start filter feeding. While we share no ancestry with fish and even the common claims that humans are still evolving, in quotation marks, deceptively mixed terminology. There are documented changes in human tolerance for certain foods that shed light on the relevance of our ancestors' diets for us, apart from evolutionary claims. A great example is the ability to tolerate milk, particularly the lactose, milk sugar, in it. Humans are born with the genetic information to allow them to make the enzyme lactose to digest milk, which is a very good thing considering we depend on milk in infancy. It is generally accepted that the gene encoding lactose would be ordinarily switched off as a person grows up, making them somewhat lactose intolerant. However, in many populations, a variation disabling the off switch for this gene is widespread, making lactose tolerance or lactose persistence the norm for them. We have, however, no way of knowing when people began using dairy products. Abraham ate dairy, Genesis 18:8, just a few centuries after the global flood, and archaeology confirms dairy residue in the pots of Pleistocene people. However, if lactose intolerance was once the norm, then lactose persistence, the ability to still digest milk after infancy, may have been selectively favored in populations relying heavily on dairy resources. Lactose persistence has nothing to do with molecules to man evolution or ape to human evolution or even information adding evolution. It is just a switch on variation within the human genome. The only reasonable health related criterion for whether lactose tolerant healthy people should consume dairy products is the balance of their benefits and potential problems in the present. Even that question must be individualized according to the people and particular products involved. Many people today tolerate dairy products and profit from the rich nutritional resources they contain, so it would be foolish to recommend excluding them just because the more ancestral human condition may have been lactose intolerance. Man did not evolve through a series of ape-like ancestors, but humans have throughout history adapted to the edible resources wherever they lived. Events may selectively favor people best able to subsist on available edibles, but that is adaptability, not evolution. Highly processed foods are not good nutritional choices, but that fact has nothing to do with evolutionary history. Biblical diet. The Bible tells us that God directed humans and animals to eat only plant products from the beginning. The Bible does not say that meat would have been unhealthy or poorly tolerated, but instead pictures a perfect world without death. Adam's family, as described in Genesis, was familiar with agriculture. Though we cannot know whether or not pre-flood people disobediently began to eat animals, God gave permission, Genesis 9:3, for people to consume meat following the global flood. Was this a concession to the altered availability of quality plant products in the post-flood world? Would we be better off meatless today? This question is debated by many people from many points of view. See What Would Jesus Eat? It gives a link by international medicine physician Dr. Tommy Mitchell to learn more about this issue. As Dr. Mitchell points out, if God, our all-wise creator, deemed vegetarianism the proper course for post-flood mankind, he could have commanded it. He did not. Vegetarianism is a personal choice available to those who determine that it is best for their bodies or personal sensibilities. It is neither commanded by Scripture nor demanded by the bodies of most people. There is no more need to return to the diet of the Garden of Eden than to the diet supposedly consumed by Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. The optimal dietary plan for individuals, people groups, and humans in general is far more complex at a biochemical and physiological level than anyone's version of a paleo diet or even a return to Eden diet could ever encompass. Throughout history, various cultural groups have adapted to available resources, but that has nothing to do with tales of human evolution from an ape-man past. Nutritional and medical advice should not depend on evolutionary presumptions, but on properly conducted medical research in the present. And that's the end of that. And I'd just like to say, as far as like the diet, the vegetarian diets, I know a lady who has to be a vegetarian. Not meat is a problem necessarily, but because processed meat and all the hormones that our modern farming system puts into the meat, she developed an allergy to it. So, there's different things that we do in our modern food systems that does create a lot of problems for people. I myself am on a gluten-free diet. I've almost gone through my first year, although I've cheated a few times, and I paid for it because I have problems that it makes me sick. And I didn't know that was what was making me sick for a very long time. I had to experiment with my diet to try to figure out what was causing my muscles and joints to just ache so bad and have migraines. And a lot of people have different problems. Celiac disease has become more common, which is a real allergy to gluten. I think I'm more of like a gluten intolerant. I don't have the same stomach cramps and problems that celiac disease is more commonly associated with. And there's a lot of people in the alternative media that they go extremes on some of these diets, and I listened to one not that long ago who they were making fun of these dairy-free, gluten-free diets and such. And on one hand, she had made a fair point because she lives in, I think it was Northern California. And yeah, I understand yuppies and stuff, certain specialized diets get so popular and people just go from one extreme to the other because they're following the fads rather than the nutritional, what actually works for them and figuring out why it works for them. And no, I don't think you should follow the crowd on these kind of diets. If paleo diet works for you, okay, fine, but figure out why is it working for you. Is there something else? Is there another underlying cause? Like, is there something in the food that you're suddenly cutting out and sticking with the meat? Was there actually something in those foods? Like, for the longest time, I was just trying to cut out the sugar and the salt because those were the only common denominators. I was eating so much prepackaged foods, and those were the common denominators that I could figure out. And then later when I realized, I have a thyroid problem, and I was looking up thyroid diets particularly, and that's what led me to the gluten-free. I'm like, that was the other common denominator that I didn't realize. I just didn't see it for what it was. So, it takes a long time sometimes to put all the dots together and do your research. And again, whatever your health problem is, talk to your doctor. Hopefully you have a good one that'll work with you and not just chase medical fads. Because there's alternative medicine fads, and then there's your more modern medicine, they have their own fads that they go, it's a big pendulum. It always swings one way or the other. And, the Lord said straight and narrow. And I think that faces us in so many different ways. In theological meanings, of course, following Christ in our daily lives. But there's other applications, when you think about um, grace. And somebody had this great analogy of being on a bridge. You don't get so afraid of becoming Armenian that you jump off the other side of the bridge into hardshellism. And with the diets too, and anything that you apply your life when it comes to modesty, you straight and narrow, be humble, dress modestly, don't go one extreme or the other. Okay, and being modest doesn't mean you have to wear only black, head to toe, or something like that. You can have a little more style to it and still be modest. And with diets, get back on our subject, I'm sorry, but be careful with what you're cutting out and why you're cutting it out. Make sure you're doing your research before you do it. And, maybe you have to experiment with your diets a little bit. Okay, sometimes we have to do that. Anyway, this was just kind of a different subject that I thought was interesting. I've been wanting to do more nutritional and health topics. Hopefully I'll get some more guests on here that are so much more educated on this than I am. I can only give my personal experience, and I know some people who struggle and they have various issues. When I went gluten-free, I just latched onto my friend who has celiacs. I'm like, I need your help and your coaching, because she's had so many years of eating gluten-free. It's been nice to have that support group and that help to point out, certain things. Like even eating in restaurants, it's so hard because if you ask, well, does this have gluten in it? And the waitresses, half the time they don't know. I mean, unless you go to a really yuppie restaurant where they're used to people following the fad diets, your run-of-the-mill waitresses and servers, they don't know. And I feel sorry for them having to put up with my questions, but I'm sorry. I have to do that. Okay. Anyway, with that said, we are going to go to our Proverbs for the day. This being the 25th, we are on the 25th proverb. And just, once again, like, I'm one of those people, I used to always eat whatever was put in front of me. Because I was raised, you eat what you're served, you don't be a picky eater. And so this diet stuff just makes me feel all the more self-conscious because I don't want to be a bother to anybody. But if you're having health issues, you have to do what's good for your body. That's part of being a good steward, is taking care of your body. I'm not a perfect example of that. I still drink soda, and I'm trying to cut that out again. And I know it is a constant struggle until you find what works and what's best for your body so that you can serve the Lord better in your mind, spirit, and body. And that's why it's so important, is this is part of serving the Lord. And what you eat, it doesn't just affect you, it also affects, your service to the Lord, your example that you're setting. Alright, so without further ado, we'll get to Proverbs chapter 25. These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. The heaven for height, and the earth for depth, and the heart of kings is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and there shall come forth a vessel for the finer. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne shall be established in righteousness. Put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. For better it is that it be said unto thee, Come hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince, whom thine eyes have seen. Go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof. when thy neighbor hath put thee to shame. Debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and discover not a secret to another, lest he that heareth it put thee to shame, and thine infamy turn not away. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. As an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. As the cold of snow in the time of harvest, so is a faithful messenger to them that send him, for he refresheth the soul of his masters. Whoso boasteth himself of a false gift is like clouds and wind without rain. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Hast thou found honey, eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith and vomit it. Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee, and so hate thee. A man that beareth false witness against his neighbor is a mowl, and a sword and a sharp arrow. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. As he that taketh away a garment is cold in cold weather, and as vinegar upon nitre, so is he that singeth songs to an heavy heart. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. The north wind driveth away rain, so doth an angry countenance a backbiting tongue. It is better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman and in a wide house. As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. A righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. It is not good to eat much honey, so for men to search their own glory is not glory. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls.